Hey guys, Azrael here, and welcome back to Pixel Dungeon VR. Today's video is going to be a bit different. You saw the title. I made a tier list going over all the 4-star weapons in the game. Shout out to Antsong in the Discord server for being the inspiration for this video. If you guys have any other video suggestions that you'd like to see me make, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I'd love to know what sort of videos you want to see on the channel going forward. With that said, let's get started. Before we get into the tier list, I'd like to give a few disclaimers. For one, this list is just my opinion. Down in the description below, I'm going to leave a link to the tier list maker that I created for this video, so if you'd like to make a list for yourself, feel free. For two, I decided to try to be a little more objective with this list. I took into consideration a few things. I took into consideration overall damage output, utility, AoE, versatility of how the weapon is used, just to name a few things. This list isn't just me ranking the weapons based on which one I like the best. For three, this list is in no way me telling you what to use. If your favorite weapon ends up in the C or D tier, for example, don't let this list discourage you from using it. Like I said, this list is just my take based on my experience playing this game. Ultimately, you should play with whichever weapons that you prefer. With that out of the way, let's get into the tier list. Oh, and I should mention before we get started as well that this list is in fact in order. So all the weapons are in order from what I consider the worst weapon up all the way to the best weapon. For this list, we're going to be starting down at the bottom and working our way up to the top. So starting us down in the F tier, we have the Celestigma Edict. Originally, I thought this weapon didn't work. I noticed it was difficult to block attacks with that I'd normally be able to block with the Eternity Shield. However, after talking to the devs, it turns out I was just bad with it. So now I get how to use it. It's still a bit janky, but it's better than I thought. As for why I put it down in the F tier, well, it's twofold. For one, the things I mentioned above, and for two, I don't know what to use it for. To me, the heavy shield doesn't do anything that a normal shield couldn't do better. It's bigger, but it doesn't block more. You can't throw it, and worst of all, at least to me, it takes up the back slot, which means that a lot of the higher damaging weapons are off the table. For those reasons, Celestigma Edict, in my mind, is the worst 4-star in the game. Hopefully, this weapon receives some buffs to give it a unique role or niche because I love it thematically as a paladin main. Until then, it remains at the bottom of my list. Moving up to the D tier, we have two weapons. First, we have the Divine Longbow. This weapon is severely underpowered compared to the throwing weapons, even with its barrage. The roll that I have on mine deals about 425 damage if all the shots are weakness hits. That sounds like a good amount of damage, until you consider that the first arrow only does 196 on weakness. The Doomslayer, for comparison, deals 561 damage on weakness hit with the AoE perk, 312 if you don't hit it, which is still much more than you'd get with a Divine Longbow with a single arrow. And you could, of course, use the spread shot, but the barrage is just a lot more consistent. Even then, hitting all weakness hits on the barrage isn't likely, so your damage is going to be likely lower on average, even if you spam it. And also, there's very little AoE with this weapon, even with the barrage, or even with the spread shot for that matter. But despite that, this weapon's still very fun to use. I just did a run recently where you're seeing this footage that came from, and I had a blast using the weapon with this setup. Though, despite that, I still think Divine Longbow itself could use a lot of help in terms of scaling and consistency, so that's why it starts off the D tier. Next up in the D tier, we have the Arcane Fount. Now, I've already done a video on this weapon, so you probably already know why it's down here. If you haven't seen that video, I concluded that the damage is too low, the charge time is slow, and its lack of scaling really holds it back. Of course, all of this is with the caveat that mine has 2 stats. I did find someone with a 3-stat Arcane Fount hitting for about 250 damage on normal enemies, which is definitely higher than my showings, but not by much. As for why I place it above the Divine Longbow, there are 2 reasons. For one, it's consistent damage. It can hit through basically anything and also does the same damage no matter what. And for 2, it's AoE, especially its unique perk that increases the size of its AoE, which makes it more consistent. And that's honestly a common theme with the wand. It's a very consistent weapon. The problem is its damage is so low, and also it has such a slow charge speed that despite its consistent damage, you really can't do very much compared to other weapons, so it lags behind. Fortunately, the devs are looking at this weapon, so who knows, it might get some buffs soon. But until then, it's down in the D tier. Kicking off the C tier, we have Radiant Judgment. Like the wand, this weapon only really does one thing. It's a throwing weapon. While it has a melee hitbox, its melee damage might as well be non-existent. It's also purely single target. So why is it above the arcane count? Damage mostly, but also because its output is much faster. Not to mention you can have two of them at a time. The roll I have on mine deals a high amount of damage to bosses, especially the Fallen Angel. However, due to it lacking in just about everywhere else, I've placed Radiant Judgment in C tier. Next in the C tier, we have the Ultimatum. If I can be honest for a sec, I didn't think I'd rank this weapon this high. I've always been of the opinion that the barrage that it and the Divine Longbow have are overrated. Frankly, I still hold that opinion. However, I can actually am impressed by this weapon's damage potential. If you forego the barrage and instead take the 5 shots in a reload perk, you'll see what I mean. With this perk, the damage becomes much more consistent at the cost of spam that the barrage provides. The fact that this weapon has 2 viable setups is what puts it above the rest of the weapons so far. Yes, I know it also has the spread shot, but in my mind, there's no reason to use it. Like with the Divine Longbow and the Arcane Fount, Ultimatum lacks any real damage scaling. Sure, it can theoretically hit 770 damage per 5 shots before reloading, but that requires all weakness hits, and it deals 154 damage each. Not to mention that only applies to normal enemies. On bosses, its damage plummets to 90 per shot on weakness hit with this roll. That inconsistency really holds this weapon back and puts Ultimatum in the C tier. The next weapon in this tier we have is the Thunderbat, the first melee weapon on this list. I actually think this weapon is underrated, as I've heard people say this weapon is the worst in the game. For one, it can stun on weakness hit, which is huge against certain enemies, including elites and bosses. 2, it has a unique perk that lets it stun multiple enemies in close proximity. 3, it has damage scaling. So, what's holding it back? Well, it's base damage. At max rank, Thunderbat has a base damage of 64, which puts it below most of the back weapons where it competes for a spot on your loadout. Like I said, I really like this weapon. It's fun to use, and its AoE perk is satisfying. It's just an older weapon that could use some love. Really all it needs is an increase to its base damage for it to be more viable. Until then, my beloved Thunderbat is in the C tier. At the top of C tier, we've got Stardust Eternablade. Like Thunderbat, I think this weapon is underrated. It deals really good damage, and it's pretty flexible. Not to mention, it's one of the only 2 weapons in the game that has the perk that reduces your dash recharge rate. Side note, your dash normally has about a 6-second cooldown, with the 200% dash recharge rate perk that can be found on either this or the Start on Ripper, which we'll talk about later, that reduces the cooldown to 3 seconds. I didn't realize just how powerful this is until I started using it. Being able to have a low dash cooldown helps with mobility not only for dodging attacks, but also for making combat feel much more fluid. If I have this much praise for Stardust Eternablade, why is it C tier? Well, there's 2 reasons. For one, this weapon has no AoE. And for 2, it lacks range, making it harder for you to hit weakness hits, especially on elites and bosses. I will say, I didn't like this weapon at first, but after working on this video and playing around with it a bit, it's become one of my new favorites. I'd say this is a fitting end to the C tier. Moving on to the B tiers, kicking us off we have Sunfall. When the Maul class was first introduced as a weapon class, I knew I wanted the 4-star version the most out of all of the new 4-stars they added at the time. This big bonking stick, as I like to call it, has the same AoE stun ability that Thunderbat has. However, unlike the Thunderbat, Sunfall has high base damage and really good reach. While its base damage is higher, its overall damage isn't that much higher, unfortunately. Especially not compared to a lot of the other melee options in this tier. For those reasons, Sunfall unfortunately hits the bottom of B tier for me. Hopefully one day, it can do more damage and shine. Next up in the B tier, we have the Plaguebringer. The Mace class is a pretty solid weapon class, all things considered. It has pretty good damage, you can stun on weakness hit just like the Thunderbat and Sunfall before it, and it has decent reach, though not better than the Sunfall, of course. Its unique ability allows it to summon a lightning strike on hit that strikes a random enemy for 150% damage. The lightning strike also has the effect that it can stun itself. This means that you can potentially stun 2 enemies at once, though in most cases you'll end up either taking out both enemies or just taking out one of the random enemies with the lightning hit. While its AoE isn't that great, and without the lightning strike its damage is on the average side, it's a side weapon, and for me that's what put it just above Sunfall in this tier. Though realistically speaking, you could have these two weapons be interchangeable. It's up to you. But for me, I value having a side weapon over a back weapon that is good for AoE and crowd control. So it's right here. The third weapon in this tier is the Sun Core. The Sun Core and the Plaguebringer are almost the same weapon. They're both side weapons with the perk that summons a lightning strike on hit every 3 seconds. So what put the Sun Core above the Plaguebringer? Well, the fact that it's throwable. This is actually the very first hybrid weapon on this list, since Sun Core is able to be built as a melee or a ranged weapon. Though if you ask me, I'd say you're better off building it as a throwing weapon for 2 reasons. For one, it's small. Smaller than Stardust, which already struggles hitting taller or floating enemies. So in Sun Core's case, it's even worse. 2, it deals more damage as a throwing weapon actually, which is a common theme with a lot of the hybrid weapons, but we'll talk more about those later. Sun Core is a solid weapon that deals pretty good damage, and when combined with the attack AoE perk, it does pretty decent AoE as well. And it's a fairly flexible weapon considering, again, you can build it either as a melee or a ranged weapon, and even if you are using it as a melee weapon with a ranged build, it still works, unlike the Radiant Judgment we talked about before. Unfortunately for Sun Core, it has some pretty stiff competition, not only from weapons in this tier, but also the next tiers up, so Sun Core is solidly, in my opinion, in the B tier. We are now officially halfway through the B tier. Next up, and at the very center of the B tier, we've got the Eternity Shield. This weapon is a staple in most of my loadouts. Having the ability to mitigate up to 30% of all damage that you would take just by holding it is honestly insane. Combine with the reflect damage on block and you've got a solid offhand. And unlike the Celestigma Edict, this one actually blocks properly, so you can make use of that reflect damage. The Eternity Shield could also be built with the damage in mind, with that AoE explosion perk that it has, along with some throwing damage added too. And honestly, the damage you get from that combo is nothing to sneeze at. While it is not the highest damage in the game, it still works in a pinch. To me, the Eternity Shield is a solid landing right in the middle of the B tier. I would love to see if the devs would be willing to add shield bashing as another cool way to use this weapon, but that's just a personal ask. Who knows? Maybe one day. The next weapon in the B tier may surprise you, but I put the Draconic Inferno here. Now, before you say anything, I already know that these things are a shred machine. I've seen and also experienced it a bit while I was filming, just the shred quality these weapons have. They can go through a mini boss in seconds with the right loadout. It's insane the amount of damage they can do consistently. So yeah, they have the damage. However, there are 2 main reasons why I put them down here. The first reason I put them down here is, well, you need 2 of them to do it. Because for one, the claws on their own don't actually do that much damage, at least not compared to any of the other hard-hitting melee weapons later on in this list. And for 2, well, you better hope you have better luck than I did, because I only got 2 stats on both of mine. So if you have claws with 2 stats, your damage is going to suffer quite a bit. The irony is, both of my claws have the exact same stats on them. I didn't plan that, it just happened that way. But yeah, because of those 2 things, I put them in the B tier. Realistically speaking, they don't have anywhere near the utility as the Sun Core or the Eternity Shield. However, the reason I put them this high is purely because of their damage. Just like with the Radiant Judgment, where I said it was being carried in that tier because of its damage, well, this weapon is also being carried because of its damage. However, the next 2 weapons in this tier do around the same damage that this weapon does, but a bit more consistently because you don't need 2 of them to do it. Okie dokie, we're down to the last 2 weapons in the B tier. Taking the penultimate spot, we have the Divine Sword. I'll be honest with you all, this placement hurts me the most. Divine Sword is my favorite weapon in the game. It's the very first legendary that I wanted when I first started playing this game. It's also the first weapon I built a loadout around. It helped me get the Lord of Ghosts sword and the Skeleton King's axe. This weapon's my old reliable. It's the weapon that I pretty much use out of the most out of every weapon in the game. I love it so much. It is my favorite weapon just ever. I could gush over it for hours, but I'm not going to do that. If I'm going to be as objective as possible with this list, I have to concede that this weapon's only really good for damage. Just like with the claws before, this weapon is just damage. There is a little bit of AoE utility with the perk that gives AoE, but I never run that because, well, I typically supplement the AoE with something else, but we'll talk about those weapons later on. So yeah, it has high damage potential, but not much else. So while it hurts me, Old Reliable is trapped in the B tier. At least it's near the top of the list. At least that's what I tell myself to make myself feel better about this. All right, very last weapon in the B tier, we have the Guandao. Truth be told, the top two spots here are nearly interchangeable. They are both very high damage back weapons that don't really do that much else. However, there's a reason why I put Guandao slightly ahead, and that's because of its reach. Glaives have the inherent advantage that they're much longer than a sword, and thus they can hit the weakness of the bosses and elites much easier than the heavy swords can in this game. That, and there is a potential second build this weapon could have, should the devs look at a specific perk, wink wink nudge nudge, that would give this weapon a distinct playstyle alongside its normal way of using it. However, there is one thing I will say about the Guandao, and that's really what keeps it in the B tier, is that it is a bit inconsistent with its hitbox. I noticed that there are times where you try to swing with it and it just either glances off or really just does nothing. So that little weird inconsistency is what traps it down in the B tier. But with that, we've broken into the top 5. Going forward, everything is either A tier or S tier. Now on to the A tiers and the rest of the top 5. Taking the number 4 spot, we have Doomslayer. This weapon is very versatile, able to be used as a melee and a throwing weapon. Like I mentioned with the Sun Core before, while its damage isn't too terribly high, it's still very consistent, and it's versatile. The AoE on it is one of the best in the game. Not the best AoE, we'll talk about the best AoE in a second, but definitely one of my favorite AoEs in the game. Being a side weapon also allows it to be a great support for some of those higher damaging weapons in the back slot, such as the Divine Sword and the Guandao, which I just spoke about, making this a very solid weapon overall. The only thing holding it back is its damage isn't the highest, like I mentioned. However, it's a very solid pick if you're looking for a support weapon or just a weapon to round out a build. It pretty much does kind of whatever you really need it to, in a way. And a lot of the A tiers are similar in this regard that you'll see. So I'd say this is a perfect way to start off the A tier. Now on to the top 3. In third place, we've got Holy Dawn. Spears in general are a very strong weapon class. They're the only melee class in the game that has consistent damage. Just like Doomslayer, Holy Dawn is a hybrid weapon with strong damage and very good AoE. What puts it above Doomslayer for me is its damage. Because it's consistent, it is consistently higher than the Doomslayer, so that puts it above it for me. Also, the fact that it has more reach as a melee weapon, and also it has the perk that would give it dash attacks just like the glaive does. So this weapon has potentially 3 viable builds that you could run, either as a melee weapon with good reach, a ranged weapon, or a dash attack weapon. Honestly speaking, this weapon could have been the number 1 weapon in the game. And I know for some people, they would consider it the top weapon in the game. However, in my opinion, the 2 weapons above just do something a little bit better than the Holy Dawn can. Because, like I mentioned, its damage is consistent, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because its damage is solid. You already know how much damage you're going to get every single time you use it. However, it doesn't scale as high. Because of its damage being consistent, it scales much lower than a lot of the other weapons will. So, with that said, we're on to the top 2. Okay, we are now down to the top 2. In second place, we have Blood Moon Sovereign. This weapon is a beast. It has the biggest AoE in the game, some of the best damage, build diversity, and it's a side weapon. I'll be honest, this weapon could have been the best weapon in the game. Its draw slash is the coolest looking ability, hands down, and it's super easy to use and activate. Theoretically, you could actually spam it if you practice. And I have seen someone while I was playing who has learned how to do that. So it's not that hard to do. And it also is pretty effective as well. Its inability to be thrown isn't even that much of a drawback considering just how versatile it is. As either you can use it as a main damage wielder, you can use it as a support, you can use it for AoE and crowd control, or you can even use it as like an offhand. So there's so many things you can do with it, and it's such a heavy hitter as well, where it's good for boss fights, it's good for really anything you need to do. It's a workhorse. However, in my opinion, the number one weapon just is miles ahead of it, and you'll see why momentarily. And now for the moment you've all been waiting for. The number one 4-star in the game. The one and only S tier weapon on this list. At the number one spot we have Stardon Ripper. This weapon is honestly insane. It does so many things. It has some of the highest damage in the game with its dual wounding perk, allowing it to deal over 1000 damage with the roll that I'm currently using, and that's before you add on damage fruits and precision dash. Even when you're not dual wielding, I have a throwing version of this dagger that hits over 600 damage consistently on weakness hit with a single throw. It's great as a damage dealer. It's great as a support thanks to its dash recharge perk that we talked about earlier. Plus, it can also double as a pseudo shield with how well you can block with it and counterattack. It's great thrown and in the melee. The only real drawback this weapon has is its lack of AoE. Other than that, you can do virtually anything with it. You also have to get used to its range, which can make it a little hard to use, but if you spend some time on this weapon, I promise you will not be disappointed. And that's the tier list. Thank you all for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video took me about almost 3 weeks to make because I had to not only create the tier list itself, but also get footage for each of the legendary weapons. Some of them I didn't really have fully upgraded. Some of them I didn't have good rolls on. So it took me a while to get this video together because I wanted to try to be, as I said earlier, be as objective as I could with this tier list. However, I know that not all my rolls were perfect, and I could have played a little bit better with some of the footage, so I hope you still enjoyed despite that. And like I said, this took me 3 weeks. I initially made the tier list on the 4th of this month, and I didn't finish recording until, well, when you're seeing it, well, the day before you're seeing this. I finished recording it literally yesterday and rushed to make sure it looked good, make sure everything was working properly, and I uploaded it right now. This is easily my most ambitious video, and I do have plenty of other videos planned, so leave a comment down below what you thought, leave a comment down below what you want to see next, and for the tier list specifically, what would you consider the best weapon in the game? What would you consider the worst? Feel free to let me know in the comments. I will be dropping a link below to the tier list maker that I created, so if you want to make a tier list for yourself, feel free. I'd love to see what you guys think about the weapons in the game, and also just get community talking, because it's not just about what someone like me who has spent a very long time in this game thinks about the game. I like to hear from you guys and what you all think, because ultimately it's a video for all of us. And yeah, that's all I got. I'll see you on the next video. Until then, farewell.